Right direction? No change. A 20-year-old, Madam Speaker, named Govind Singh was admitted to Halberton Hospital for treatment of an abdominal injury. He was taken to the operating room where it was determined that he only had a bruised pancreas and the corrective work was supposedly done. Soon thereafter, his bowel contents started leaking. Nothing was done, Madam Speaker, with the explanation that there was nothing else that could be done. The family members asked if there was anyone in Antigua capable of taking care of this problem. They said no and recommended that the young man be taken to Trinidad. As his condition worsened, the family was forced to find $70,000 US, $70,000 US to fly him to Trinidad via an ambulance for treatment 9 days later. On the operating table in Trinidad, the doctors found 2 large tears, one 5 centimeters, the other 3 centimeters, through which the bowel contents were leaking. By that time, the tears had become seriously infected and septic that the doctors were unable to do anything immediately. He remained under treatment for 2 weeks and then had to return to Antigua because the family had no more money to keep him hospitalized in Trinidad. When the family finally got him to Dr. Joey John, he could not stand up. He could not hold his head, Madam Speaker. He had lost 80 pounds. He was extremely septic with pus infected all over. Dr. John operated on this young man in his own operating room and spent 7 hours fixing all the old and new problems that were created inside his belly. He spent 3 days on life support and was sent home 2.5 weeks later. Today, Madam Speaker, that young man is now fully recovered and is employed as a computer technician in Medical Surgical Associates. About 1.5 years ago, a woman went to Halberton Hospital to be treated for diverticulitis, which is an infection in the colon. Following the corrective operation, bowel contents started to come from the wound. She became very ill and needed to be placed on life support. The family begged, the family pleaded with the authorities at Halberton to take her to Dr. Joey John. In response, the family was threatened. The family was threatened that if the patient was taken to Dr. John and she needed dialysis, she would not be able to return to Halberton. The family took her to Cleveland Clinic in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where doctors cleaned up the abscesses that were inside the abdominal cavity and determined that she would have to wait 1 year to do the major operation. In the meantime, she could not eat because everything would come through, Madam Speaker, through the incision. As a result, total parenteral nutrition was administered to a big vein in the neck for 14 hours a day. In September 2008, when they were ready to do the operation, she was informed there would be a very long procedure. They gave her the estimate. She could not afford it. The family turned to Dr. John, who performed a 6-hour operation at his clinic. 3 days later, she was able to have her first meal in 16 months. We all, of course it was in the papers. We all know of the mother of the ambulance driver who was taken to Halberton Hospital just 2 or 3 weeks ago with breathing problems. She was admitted to O'Reilly ward, but nothing was done for her. An orderly, a young orderly, walked by and said, "This woman is in a lot of trouble." He was then able to get her transferred to the intensive care unit. 12 hours after admission. 12 hours after admission. To cut a long story short, Madam Speaker, after much difficulty, The patient was transferred to Dr. John's clinic, where she was intubated and placed on a ventilator to breathe. Dr. John diagnosed pneumonia, as well as a particular neurological condition, and started treating her accordingly. The patient started to improve, but needed to have an MRI. The only available MRI is a closed one at Belmont, which is unsuitable because of the size of the patient. Do you know, Madam Speaker, that an open MRI has been installed at Mount St. John since 2004, but remains unavailable to serve the needs of Antiguans and Barbudans? That can be right? Since 2004, and people have to go into their pocket and pay $1,700 at Belmont for each MRI that they do? And there's one up there that was bought by the previous administration that sits up there unused. The patient had to be flown to Trinidad via air ambulance on a ventilator for the MRI examination to facilitate diagnosis. She's now back in Antigua and has been weaned slowly off the same ventilator. The authorities at Halberton said, remember, the authorities at Halberton said she did not need to be on a ventilator. Within the past week, last week, a woman was discharged from Halberton after hospitalization for 1 month, paralyzed on one side, and being told she had a stroke, despite the results of the CAT scan being normal. Again, the patient, like so many others before, begged the authorities to get an opinion from another doctor. As was the case previously, she was told if she left the hospital, she would not be allowed back in. And this is none of Dr. John's business. She was finally discharged a month later, at which point she was carried down to Dr. John's office, unable to walk because she was still paralyzed. It took Dr. John less than 1 hour to make the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Less than 1 hour to make the diagnosis, multiple sclerosis. Madam Speaker, this is not fancy fiction. As I speak, there's a single mother of 4 from All Saints who texted me on my phone, and I have it and I'll show it to you, last evening. And she said to me, Mr. Michael, when you go to Parliament, I'm a young mother of 4. I have cervical cancer. I'm 34 years old. I need assistance. I went to the health minister since July of this year, and he says the government has no money and is unable to help her. We all know that whereas there were 2 laparoscopic surgeons at Halberton before, there are none now. None, Madam Speaker. Basic laparoscopy that is being performed at Halberton, folks are taking 3 and 4 hours to do what it took previously minutes to do. At the same time, the complication rate and the conversion to open surgery, because they can't finish it laparoscopically, because they have no laparoscopic surgeons up there, is over 50%. We also know, Madam Speaker, there's a particular Indian surgeon, I speak facts, Dr. Krishna. Dr. Krishna, who is paid to be at Halberton Hospital, he's seldom ever there. And in fact, he operates a private practice out of Adeline. We have him on a tape recording, Madam Speaker, in a drunken state, cursing the Minister of Health and mouthing off how he gives the other Cuban surgeon monies to do most of the work up at Halberton so that he can run his private practice at Adeline. We have him on tape. And we also know, Madam Speaker, of the many complications and fatalities associated with this surgeon's care, with all get swept underneath the carpet. That's why the Minister refuses to be here.
Honourable Member, be very careful. Please don't call the names of people who have no right of reply.
Okay, Madam Speaker.
Say those things outside.
Okay. Madam Speaker, I will not call his name.